Love rarely ends with a storm. Most relationships don't break apart in a single fight, betrayal, or confession. They fade, quietly, slowly, in ways that barely make a sound. You don't wake up one morning and decide you've grown apart. It happens in the pauses, in the silences, in the moments you stop noticing. Connection doesn't vanish overnight. It unravels through small, almost invisible choices that feel harmless at first. You stop talking about your dreams. You scroll while they're speaking. You forget to say goodnight. You start calling peace what is really distance. And before you know it, the person sitting beside you feels like a stranger you used to love. The most dangerous part? You don't see it happening. Because losing connection rarely looks dramatic. It looks comfortable. It hides behind routines that feel stable, behind politeness that feels mature, behind words like, "we're fine," or "we're just busy." But love doesn't die in chaos. It dies in quiet neglect. It dies when laughter becomes rare, when effort feels heavy, when presence turns into habit. It dies when both people start surviving each other instead of seeing each other. Every relationship begins with energy. That magnetic pull where you both can't stop talking, touching, or dreaming. You listen deeply. You care about every word, every gesture, every emotion. You notice their moods before they do. You want to know everything. But slowly, as life piles up, deadlines, stress, routines, that curiosity fades. You begin to assume instead of ask. You prioritize comfort over connection. And in the name of peace, you let silence replace effort. The truth is, emotional disconnection doesn't always mean love is gone. It means love has gone unnoticed. It means you've stopped watering something that once bloomed on its own. Relationships don't need perfection. They need awareness. The awareness to notice when your partner's smile doesn't reach their eyes, when conversations feel shorter, when your jokes stop making them laugh, when the space between you no longer feels safe enough to be honest. This isn't about blame. It's about awakening. Because every relationship faces this invisible drift at some point. What matters is whether you recognize it and choose to turn back toward each other. Connection isn't built from grand gestures or romantic quotes. It's built from everyday attention, listening, noticing, touching, laughing, appreciating. It's the small, consistent acts that say, "I still see you." In the pages ahead, we'll explore 15 silent ways couples lose connection without realizing it. Not to scare you, but to remind you. To remind you that love doesn't vanish in anger. It fades in absence. And it can return if you catch the silence early enough to speak again. Because the quiet between two hearts isn't always the end. Sometimes, it's a signal that one honest conversation could bring everything back to life. When conversations turn into routine checklists. When your conversations in a relationship start feeling like daily checklists instead of heartfelt exchanges. It's a quiet signal that emotional connection is fading. What once was full of curiosity, laughter, and genuine listening now becomes mechanical. Did you eat? Did you pay the bill? What time will you be home? These questions may sound like care, but they lack the warmth and depth that once kept two people emotionally in tune. Over time, partners stop sharing their inner worlds, their dreams, worries, or random late-night thoughts, because they feel the other person isn't truly present anymore. The relationship slips into autopilot, where both function as teammates managing logistics instead of lovers sharing life. It often starts subtly. One partner grows busier, the other feels unheard, and soon both unconsciously stop trying to engage on a deeper level. Emotional intimacy, which thrives on vulnerability and active listening, begins to dry up. What makes this stage dangerous is that it doesn't come with fights or dramatic tension. It comes with quiet distance. You don't notice the love disappearing because everything still works. Bills are paid, routines run smoothly, but the emotional heartbeat is gone. If conversations no longer make you feel seen or understood, that's when loneliness begins, even while sitting beside each other. Reconnection requires intention. It means breaking the routine by asking open questions again. What's been on your mind lately? Or what made you smile today? It's about listening without distractions, about remembering that your partner isn't a daily task. They're a living story you once couldn't stop reading. Love fades not when people fight, but when they stop being curious about each other's hearts. Bringing back that curiosity is how you turn checklists into conversations that heal, bond, and remind you why you chose each other in the first place. When you stop sharing random thoughts. When you stop sharing random thoughts with your partner, the silly ideas, small frustrations, or fleeting observations that once filled your conversations, it's often a quiet sign that emotional closeness is fading. In the early stages of love, you share everything. A funny meme, a thought about the weather, something you noticed on your way to work. It all feels worth mentioning because your partner is part of your inner world. But when that spark begins to dull, those casual thoughts stay in your mind instead of being spoken out loud. You start thinking, they won't care, or it's not important, and without realizing it, you begin to edit yourself around the person you once felt safest with. These unfiltered, everyday thoughts are actually the invisible threads that hold a relationship together. They build intimacy through constant, effortless connection. When you stop sharing them, silence starts to fill the spaces that once felt warm. Conversations become shorter, more functional, and emotionally thinner. You might still talk, but not about what truly reflects your personality, your humor, your curiosity, your spontaneous emotions. Over time, that distance grows until you feel like you're living parallel lives rather than a shared one. The saddest part is that both partners usually feel it but don't say anything. They assume the other is simply busy or tired, but beneath the surface, the loss of random conversations often signals something deeper, a growing emotional wall. Rebuilding that bond means daring to be unfiltered again. Share that weird dream, that random song lyric stuck in your head, that story that made you laugh. Those small moments create emotional texture and keep your relationship alive. It's never about the content, it's about the feeling of being seen, heard, and allowed to exist freely in each other's world. When silence feels safer than speaking, when silence begins to feel safer than speaking, the heart of a relationship quietly starts to fade. At first, you tell yourself you're avoiding conflict, that it's better to stay quiet than to trigger an argument or cause discomfort. But with time, that silence becomes a wall, not a shield. You begin to hold back your feelings, your disappointments, even your joys, because you fear being misunderstood, dismissed, or judged. What was once a space of openness turns into one of quiet tension, where words stay trapped inside, and the air between you feels heavy with everything left unsaid. This stage rarely arrives suddenly. It creeps in through repeated experiences, moments where your partner didn't listen, where your feelings were minimized, or where your vulnerability was met with indifference. Eventually, you learn that silence keeps the peace, even if it kills the connection. You stop explaining what's wrong because you believe they won't care or won't change. And ironically, both of you start mistaking that calm for harmony, when in reality, it's emotional distance disguised as stability. True intimacy thrives on communication, not just happy words, but honest ones. The courage to speak, even when it's uncomfortable, is what keeps love alive. When silence replaces truth, resentment begins to grow. You start feeling unseen, unheard, and emotionally alone, even when you're sitting right next to them. Healing begins the moment one person decides to speak again, not to accuse, but to connect. It could be as small as saying, "I miss how we used to talk," or "I've been holding things in because I didn't want to argue." That kind of honesty reopens the emotional door. Love doesn't need constant words, but it does need safe ones. Because when silence feels safer than speaking, it's not peace you've found. It's distance wearing a disguise. When you scroll instead of listening, when you find yourself scrolling through your phone instead of truly listening to your partner, it's more than just a bad habit. It's a subtle fracture in emotional intimacy. What begins as harmless multitasking soon becomes a quiet act of disconnection. You hear the words they're saying, but you're not really listening. Your mind is half in the conversation, half lost in digital noise. To your partner, that moment feels like invisibility, like they're competing with a screen for your attention and losing every time. At its core, listening is one of the most powerful ways to say, "I care." It tells your partner their voice matters. But when your eyes are on a glowing screen instead of theirs, the message you send is the opposite. You're not a priority right now. Slowly, they stop sharing the little details, how their day went, what bothered them, what made them smile. They start internalizing everything because they feel unheard. The result isn't an explosion of arguments, it's the quiet decay of connection. Over time, both partners begin living side by side but emotionally worlds apart. You may still share a bed, a house, and a routine, but not attention, not curiosity, not presence. The phone becomes a wall that keeps you distracted and disconnected from the person sitting right in front of you. Rebuilding closeness starts with simple, intentional awareness. The next time they speak, put the phone down. Look up, make eye contact. Let silence exist without reaching for the screen. Listening isn't about replying, it's about receiving. Because when you truly listen, you create a space where love feels seen again. Connection doesn't die in one big argument. It dies in those quiet moments when scrolling replaces presence, and attention stops feeling like love. When you don't notice their small changes anymore, when you stop noticing your partner's small changes, a new haircut, a different tone in their voice, a quiet mood shift, it's not just forgetfulness. It's a sign that emotional awareness in the relationship is fading. In the beginning, every detail feels precious. You notice how they style their hair, the sparkle in their eyes when they talk about something they love, or the tired look after a long day. Those small observations create emotional intimacy. They show your partner that you see them, that their presence doesn't go unnoticed. But as time passes, familiarity can turn into blindness. You stop observing because you assume you already know everything about them. The relationship slips into routine. Your attention shifts to other things: work, screens, stress, deadlines. When they change something about themselves, you might miss it entirely, and to them, that feels like quiet rejection. It's not the lack of compliments that hurts most. It's the realization that the person they love no longer pays attention. This disconnection often grows unnoticed. Your partner may smile and pretend it's fine, but deep down, they begin to feel invisible. Emotional distance doesn't always come from big arguments. It often starts from moments where one person stops feeling seen. When the one who once noticed your smallest details now looks right through you, love begins to feel hollow. Reconnection doesn't require grand gestures. It requires presence. Notice again, compliment again, ask again. Did you change something? You seem quieter today, are you okay? These questions reignite awareness, and awareness is the foundation of care. Relationships thrive not on constant passion, but on constant attention, the kind that makes your partner feel visible, valued, and cherished, even in the smallest details of everyday life. When texts become fewer and colder, when texts between you and your partner become fewer and colder, it's often a quiet warning that emotional warmth is slipping away. At first, you might not notice. A few missed replies here, a shorter response there. But soon, the energy changes. The messages that once carried laughter, affection, and excitement start feeling like distant updates or polite check-ins. The good morning texts stop arriving. The emojis disappear. The tone shifts from connection to obligation. And somewhere between all those half-hearted messages, the heartbeat of your relationship begins to fade. Texting might seem like a small thing, but in modern love, it's how we stay emotionally tethered when we're apart. It's not about frequency, it's about warmth, intention, and presence. When your messages start losing that, it often means something deeper is changing. One or both of you may be emotionally withdrawing, consciously or not. You start communicating only when necessary rather than because you want to. The result isn't just fewer texts, it's fewer moments of feeling close. This decline doesn't happen overnight. It usually follows emotional disconnection in real life. When conversations at home feel empty, texts naturally become transactional. What used to be "I miss you" turns into "don't forget the keys." The emotional tone shifts from love to logistics, from connection to convenience. To rebuild warmth, you have to bring back intention. A genuine "how was your day?" sent with care can matter more than a dozen empty messages. Add small reminders of affection again. A good memory, a random thought, a picture that made you smile. Digital intimacy is still intimacy. When you take time to make your messages feel alive again, you're not just texting. You're choosing to keep love's pulse beating, one word at a time. When you stop saying good morning and good night, when you stop saying good morning and good night, it might seem like a small thing, just a skipped text, a missed moment. But it often signals something deeper, the quiet fading of daily affection. Those simple greetings once held emotional weight. They were small rituals of connection, ways of saying, "You're the first person I think of when I wake up, and the last before I sleep." When those words disappear, so does the gentle reassurance that love is still being tended to, even in the most ordinary moments. In healthy relationships, consistency builds safety. The daily rhythm of checking in and saying goodnight becomes a thread of emotional stability, a reminder that no matter how chaotic the day gets, you still belong in each other's thoughts. But when that stops, it's rarely just about being busy. It's usually about emotional drift. One person stops initiating, and the other quietly mirrors that energy, creating a gap neither mentions. Eventually, both adjust to the silence, convincing themselves it's normal, even though it feels lonelier. What makes this silence dangerous is how subtle it is. There's no argument, no breakup, just the slow erosion of connection. The affection that once came naturally now feels awkward to bring back. But the truth is, love lives in those small acts of presence. You don't need long conversations or grand gestures. Sometimes, a single good morning can bring warmth back into a cold rhythm. When you reintroduce those simple words, you're really saying, I still choose you, every day and every night. It's not about habit, it's about care. Because relationships rarely fall apart from one big thing. They fade in the spaces where little gestures, like these two words, quietly disappear. When you laugh more with others than with them, when you start laughing more with others than with your partner, it's not just about humor, it's about emotional distance quietly forming. Laughter is one of the most powerful signs of connection. It's the language of comfort, safety, and shared joy. When you first fell in love, laughter probably came easily. Inside jokes, silly moments, teasing each other without fear. That laughter wasn't just about being funny. It was about being close. But when it starts fading, it's a sign that something inside the relationship has gone quiet. You might still talk, still share space, still function as a couple. But the warmth that laughter once created is replaced by formality. You laugh at a friend's joke, at a coworker's story, or even at something on your phone. But with your partner, the energy feels heavy or serious. It's not that you've stopped finding things funny. It's that you've stopped feeling emotionally light around them. This kind of emotional heaviness often grows from unresolved tension, unspoken resentment, boredom, or a loss of emotional safety. When laughter disappears, it's not just silence that fills the space, it's caution. A relationship without laughter begins to feel like a business partnership. Everything becomes practical, efficient, and serious. You start avoiding playfulness because it feels forced or because you're afraid it won't be reciprocated. And yet, laughter is one of the most intimate acts two people can share. It's vulnerability disguised as joy. Rebuilding that spark means letting go of defensiveness and inviting lightness again. Watch a funny movie together. Tell that embarrassing story. Tease gently. Make space for fun, even when life feels heavy. When you can laugh together again, it's proof that trust and comfort are returning. Because in love, laughter isn't just noise. It's the sound of connection breathing again. When you avoid eye contact without realizing, when you start avoiding eye contact with your partner, not out of anger, but out of habit, it's one of the most subtle yet powerful signs that emotional intimacy is fading. Eye contact is one of the most honest forms of connection. It's where affection, empathy, and vulnerability silently meet. In the early stages of love, you couldn't look away. Your eyes searched for theirs in every room, and those shared glances said everything words couldn't. But when a relationship begins to drift, even a few seconds of eye contact can start to feel uncomfortable, unfamiliar, or simply unnecessary. This avoidance doesn't usually come from dislike. It often comes from emotional fatigue. Over time, unresolved tension, disappointment, or emotional neglect can make looking directly into your partner's eyes feel heavy. You might not even notice it happening. Conversations shift from face-to-face to over the shoulder or through a phone screen. Eye contact, once a natural gesture of closeness, slowly disappears. And with it, so does the ability to read each other's emotions, the warmth, the concern, the unspoken understanding. When you stop looking at each other, you also stop seeing each other, not just physically, but emotionally. That's when misunderstandings deepen. You miss the sadness behind their smile, the longing in their expression, or the love they still try to show in quiet ways. The relationship starts operating on autopilot, without the emotional feedback that eye contact provides. Rebuilding this connection doesn't mean forcing long stares. It means being present again. Look at them when they speak. Let your eyes linger a moment longer. Notice their expressions, their pauses, their subtle emotions. Eye contact is how love silently speaks. When you dare to meet your partner's gaze again, you're not just seeing them, you're reminding them, I still care enough to look. 10. When you keep secrets, even small ones. When you start keeping secrets from your partner, even the small, seemingly harmless ones, it's often the first quiet crack in the foundation of trust. It might begin with something as simple as not mentioning a conversation, hiding a purchase, or leaving out a small truth to avoid drama. You tell yourself it's no big deal, that you're just protecting peace. But every secret, no matter how small, creates a subtle distance between you and the person who should feel closest to you. In a healthy relationship, transparency isn't about control, it's about connection. It's the comfort of knowing you don't have to hide who you are or what you do. But once secrecy enters the picture, it plants seeds of guilt and suspicion. Even if your partner never finds out, you feel the difference. You start to filter your words, measure your honesty, and live with a quiet sense of separation. What was once open and natural now feels guarded. Small secrets often multiply. You justify one, then another, until it becomes normal to withhold parts of your life. Soon, your partner stops asking because they can feel your emotional distance. That subtle hesitation before answering. That pause that wasn't there before. The trust that once felt effortless begins to require proof, explanations, or reassurance. The truth is, love can survive mistakes, but it struggles to survive half-truths. Being open doesn't mean sharing every detail of your life. It means letting your partner see the real you, your flaws, your fears, your choices. When you rebuild honesty, you rebuild safety. Because intimacy isn't about perfection. It's about trust. The more you hide, the lonelier love becomes. But when you choose honesty, even in small things, you silently tell your partner, you deserve my truth more than I fear your reaction. When you don't argue anymore, you just ignore. When you stop arguing and start ignoring, it may seem like peace, but it's really quiet disconnection. Healthy couples argue because they care enough to fix what's broken. They fight, explain, cry, and come back together because the relationship still matters to them. But when you reach the point where you no longer bother explaining, where silence feels easier than confrontation, that's when love begins to fade in the calmest, most dangerous way. At first, ignoring feels like self-protection. You tell yourself you're avoiding unnecessary fights or emotional exhaustion. But deep down, it's not about peace. It's about giving up. You've stopped expecting understanding. You've stopped believing that the other person will listen or change. And so you choose silence, not because you're calm, but because you're tired. Over time, this emotional withdrawal becomes the default mode of the relationship. Both people coexist without true communication, like strangers living under the same roof. The absence of conflict doesn't mean harmony. It often means apathy. When you no longer argue, you stop revealing what hurts you, what excites you, what matters to you. The emotional heartbeat of the relationship weakens because passion, even angry passion, has turned into indifference. Love can survive storms, but it struggles to survive emptiness. Rebuilding that connection requires courage. The courage to speak again. Not to win, but to be heard. To say, I don't want to fight. I just want us to understand each other. Arguments handled with care can strengthen love because they reveal truth. But silence buries it. The real danger isn't in yelling, it's in not caring enough to. When you stop fighting for the relationship, you're no longer avoiding pain. You're accepting distance. And that's when love begins to quietly disappear. When their absence feels normal, when your partner's absence starts to feel normal, it's one of the most haunting signs that emotional connection has quietly faded. In the beginning, even a few hours apart can feel like an ache. You notice the silence. You miss their voice, their presence, their little routines. But over time, as distance grows and affection thins, that emptiness becomes background noise. You stop missing them because you've grown used to the void. What once felt like loneliness now feels like routine. It doesn't always happen after a big argument or dramatic event. Often it's gradual. Missed dinners, busy schedules, separate hobbies, quiet nights spent scrolling instead of talking. You start living parallel lives, functioning smoothly but emotionally apart. Their absence doesn't hurt anymore because your heart has quietly adapted to it. The mind learns to protect itself from longing by lowering expectations, convincing you that this is just how relationships become. But that's not peace. That's numbness. When absence stops feeling like loss, it's because the emotional thread that once tied you together has weakened. You stop checking in, stop sharing moments, stop feeling that subtle joy of knowing they're near. And yet, beneath that calm acceptance, a deep sadness lingers, the kind that doesn't scream but quietly whispers, something beautiful is missing. Reconnection begins with awareness. Notice the silence again. Miss them intentionally. Reach out not because you should, but because you want to. Sometimes love isn't reignited through grand gestures, but through the courage to admit, I don't want your absence to feel normal anymore. Because love isn't meant to be comfortable distance. It's meant to be living, breathing presence. When you begin to crave that presence again, that's when healing starts. When normal silence turns back into longing, and longing turns back into love. When compliments disappear from both sides, the relationship quietly starts losing its warmth and emotional color. In the beginning, appreciation flows easily. You notice their smile, their outfit, their effort, the way they light up a room. You say things like, you look great today, or I love how you handled that, not out of obligation, but because love naturally makes you attentive. Those small acknowledgments create emotional closeness. They remind each other, I see you, you matter to me. But as time passes, familiarity dulls awareness. You stop noticing the little things, and even when you do, you assume they already know how you feel. Slowly, appreciation turns into silence. The energy that once felt alive becomes neutral, polite, predictable, and unexpressed. You still love each other, perhaps, but you stop showing it. Without compliments, affection becomes invisible. And when people stop feeling seen or admired, insecurity begins to quietly take root. Compliments are not about flattery. They're about connection. They are small emotional gestures that say, I still choose to look at you with love. When both partners stop doing this, the relationship loses its sparkle. Days start blending together without moments of lightness or recognition. Even worse, one or both partners might start seeking validation elsewhere. Not necessarily in betrayal, but in conversations with people who make them feel noticed again. Rebuilding this part of love doesn't require poetic words or grand gestures. It begins with paying attention again. Notice when they look good. Acknowledge their effort. Appreciate their patience, humor, or kindness. Say it out loud. Even simple things like, you make this place feel calmer, or I love how you handled that situation. Compliments breathe life into routine. Because when love stops being spoken, it slowly stops being felt. And sometimes all it takes to bring back warmth is a single, genuine word of appreciation. When you don't plan the future together. Anymore, when you stop planning the future together, it's a quiet sign that emotional unity is slipping away. In the early stages of love, the future feels like a shared horizon, filled with dreams, travel plans, home ideas, family hopes, or even small weekend getaways. You talk about we instead of I. You imagine growing together, not just growing old. But when the connection begins to fade, that shared vision slowly dissolves. Conversations that once sparkled with plans turn into short exchanges about the present. Practical, necessary, but emotionally hollow. It starts subtly. You stop mentioning long-term ideas because you're unsure how your partner will react. You stop including them in your someday thoughts because it feels uncomfortable to assume they'll still be there. They too stop asking questions like, where do you see us next year? Or should we start saving for that trip? The silence becomes mutual. Without realizing it, both begin building separate futures, parallel but no longer intertwined. When couples stop dreaming together, they also stop investing emotionally in tomorrow. The relationship becomes about maintenance, not growth. You handle what's right in front of you, bills, chores, routines. But the spark that once came from imagining possibilities disappears. Hope turns into habit, and habit, while comfortable, is where passion quietly dies. Rebuilding that shared vision doesn't mean making grand promises. It means reopening the door to curiosity. Ask again, what do you want next year to look like for us? What's something new we should try together? Planning together isn't about control, it's about connection. It reminds you both that this love still has a direction. Because when two people stop imagining a future together, they're not just losing plans, and they're losing purpose. And purpose is the heartbeat of lasting love. When you start imagining life without them, When you start imagining life without your partner, not out of anger, but out of quiet curiosity or relief, it's one of the final and most painful signs of emotional disconnection. You catch yourself daydreaming about peace, freedom, or simplicity, and those thoughts feel comforting instead of lonely. It doesn't mean you don't love them anymore. It means your heart has grown tired of the version of love you're living. What used to feel like partnership now feels like survival. And in that quiet exhaustion, the mind begins to wonder what life might be like after, when you no longer have to explain, fix, or try so hard to be understood. This stage rarely comes suddenly. It's the slow result of emotional neglect, repeated disappointment, or unspoken distance. You stop picturing shared milestones, vacations, anniversaries, even next year's plans, and start thinking in singular terms. My goals, my space, my peace. The idea of separation no longer terrifies you. It soothes you. And that's when you realize it's not just disconnection anymore, it's detachment. But here's the truth. Imagining life without someone doesn't always mean you want to leave. Sometimes it's your soul's way of reminding you what's missing: balance, safety, laughter, effort, reciprocity. It's an emotional survival instinct, trying to protect you from the pain of feeling unseen. If caught early, this awareness can become a turning point rather than an ending. It's a call to honesty, to ask yourself, what's missing that I'm craving peace without them? Healing begins with conversation, not escape. Talk, even if it's uncomfortable, because love can be rebuilt when both people are willing to look at what's broken instead of pretending it's fine. When you start imagining life without them, it's really your heart saying, I want love that feels alive again, not one that I only survive.